It's a few minutes after noon here, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Um, and so, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today in Ignite Talks with John Connors. And really a very special thanks to you, John, for taking an hour out of your day to speak with us. In terms of an introduction, John is managing partner of Ignition Partners, historically one of Seattle's largest and most active venture capital funds. And most recently, he joined as operating partner of Fuse Venture Partners, a newly formed VC fund in the Seattle area. And hopefully John will tell us a bit about that. But in addition, he serves on the board of directors of Nike and Splunk. Splunk is a publicly held software company that received early funding from Ignition and now has a $33 billion market capitalization. Before that, John spent about 16 years at Microsoft, departing in 2005 as Senior VP of Finance and Administration and CFO. Other roles that he held at Microsoft included VP of the Worldwide Enterprise Group and Chief Information Officer. John is a native of the gigantic city of Miles City in Montana and a graduate of the University of Montana. He began his career in 1984 as a CPA with Deloitte Haskins and Sells, and that's where I met John. We worked together on the audit of a company in Missoula called Washington Corporations. John and his wife, Kathy, are very involved in community activities with a particular focus on youth education, faith communities, and free market think tanks. So really just delighted to have someone with John's diverse and robust background speaking to us today. The format of today's Ignite Talks will be one of a fireside chat. I have a number of questions that I hope will be enlightening to everybody. Yet I also want this to be interactive. So if you have questions, they are welcome. And I just ask that you submit them to me in the chat box, and then I will call on you to address the questions. And I really, really do encourage, because this is a great opportunity to learn from a very senior tech executive and very experienced venture capitalist. So with that, I think let's go ahead and get started, John, if that's okay with you.
You bet, Tom.
My first question is, with all that you've done in your career, when you were growing up as a kid in Miles City in eastern Montana, what were your career aspirations at the time? Did you really expect that you would end up being CFO of one of the largest tech companies in the world and a very active venture capitalist?
No, that wasn't on my radar screen. It's funny. My grandfather was an Irish immigrant in Butte, Montana, and he was an underground copper miner. And so my father was, typical first generation, went to college, became a teacher and then a coach, and basketball, football. And he moved to eastern Montana, and we grew up in a large family in a ranching community. And he was very successful as a coach, but even more successful with kids. And I always thought growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I think it's because there was a lawyer in town named Jim Lucas, who I really liked and admired. And he had like the nicest house in town. And so I thought, oh man, I should be a lawyer. Fortunately, I went to Montana with the idea of pursuing a law school, and was a political science and econ major. And then as I studied getting into my junior year, start looking at what do law schools require, and nearly all either recommend or require you take some accounting classes. So I started taking accounting classes, and Montana has just a very, very good accounting school. And so I added accounting as a major. And then by the time I got to be a senior, I'd done all the accounting stuff. And I thought, well, I better take the CPA exam, and got hired by Deloitte. And that was the end of any idea of a lawyer. So had no idea I would go into business. I didn't come from a business family per se. It was mostly educators. and so had no idea. But as I look at the work that I did, is I had a job from the time I was 10 years old, because basically my family wasn't well to do, but more importantly, our parents were their ethos was, if you want something, you go work for it. So I had a job as had a paper route when I was 10. I worked on farms and ranches in junior high and high school. Worked as a laborer for the Burlington Northern Railroads in the summer on tie gangs, replacing tie gangs. I worked in the oil field in eastern Montana, western North Dakota, that's now the infamous Bakken formation. It wasn't even known as the Bakken in those days. So had great hard work, and the railroad and oil stuff was very well paying. So was able to put myself through college with no college debt, and then ended up coming out to Seattle and working for Deloitte. And that was really my first exposure to business, to big business, if you will.
Yep. My guess is you probably don't regret not pursuing a law degree.
I do not. It seems the world has plenty of lawyers.
And I think there's a few of them on the call here today, so we'll move on from
the
that.
lawyer jokes. But hey, I feel fortunate. I get to work with many, many talented lawyers.
Yep. So it's would you say that you're working on a ranch and being a paper boy and in the railroad, how did all of that prepare you for the career path that you did end up embarking upon?
It was really interesting, Tom. When I did get out to Seattle and started working in a big city in a major international firm, on the one hand, there was a lot I didn't know about the big city life, big business life, but it was amazing how much more I knew about some industries than a lot of kids that came from a city. They didn't know anything about mining. They didn't know anything about oil. They didn't know anything about agriculture. They didn't know anything about supply chain and about machinery and etc. And a lot of the kids hadn't had to work nearly as hard as I had to work around, let's just say, very interesting and often rough characters. When I worked in the oil field and on the railroad, these were super demanding jobs that were hard. They paid well, but there were a lot of very tough dudes you worked with. And I was always known as college boy to all these guys. And so I learned to work with immensely talented people, the things that they could do with machines and how hard they worked. So I knew a lot more about a lot of different industries and how they worked. And being around, agriculture, we're learning how, irrigation systems work, hay systems work, how cattle cycles work, how the oil industry works, how the railroad operates. That was just, at the time, I had no idea how much I was learning about these different industries, but I was actually learning a lot. And I found when I got to the city, it was very beneficial, all that work experience I had.
Yep. Well, I would also imagine that your experience with interesting and rough characters help you in the tech industry, given the preponderance of tough characters in that industry.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think the tech industry is today it's highly competitive, hardworking. It's far more civil than it was in the 90s. In the 90s, it was kind of like the Wild West, and it was like the settlers, if you will. And Microsoft had the two gentlemen running it, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, were not very gentle souls in that decade. But for me, it was like, well, these guys are, hey, they're smart, but they're not any tougher or harder to work for than the guys on an oil rig or the guys on the railroad or ranchers or farmers you work for. Very direct feedback, almost no compliments and expected to work from dawn to dusk, day after day, because that's what you did. And
Yep.
so it was well suited. It was interesting. A lot of kids from ag backgrounds were very well. There were a lot of ag people at Microsoft, and at one time in the late '90s, the early part of 2000, of the top 20 execs, half of us were from agriculture and rural backgrounds. And so, one was from a little Georgia farm, another kid was an Illinois farm boy, another guy was a Nebraska farm boy, another kid came from Centralia. It was amazing how many ag and rural background folks had moved up to the top 20 execs in the company.
Who was the individual from Centralia?
Brian Valentine.
Okay.
Very famous leader he built Exchange, he built Save the Windows server franchise, and then he moved over to Amazon and built their upgraded transaction environment about 10, 15 years ago.
Okay. Didn't he and a couple other guys write a book about their time at Microsoft? Or I might be getting confused with someone else from Central Washington.
He could have, I don't know, but I do know, I'm pretty sure Brian he's either a graduate of Central Washington or Eastern Washington, one or the other.
Okay. Okay. Was there anything that you were unprepared for, that you really had to compensate in other ways as you kind of moved from this ag background into technology?
Yeah, I think probably I being honest, I think everybody was unprepared for every single job. And, let's say, when I moved to Deloitte out of college, you're somewhat prepared. You've studied hard. You've taken the CPA exam. The organization had just, they recruited very good people. They had amazing training programs, and they had a very programmatic way in which you worked from your first year on up. And so when you got into tech, it was all pioneering work. And the companies that grew fast, it wasn't like there was hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world that had these skills that, could be hired. There just wasn't anybody with any experience in building out personal computer ecosystems or client server ecosystems. So it was a complete greenfield. And kind of the way it worked in Microsoft, and I think it's analogous in a lot of those early companies that were pioneers, they were growing so fast that there were so many opportunities to move up. And it was really a function of, how long did you stay and how much work were you willing to do and how much grief were you willing to absorb. Mm-hmm. But, almost every job I wasn't prepared for. And you just kind of went to work every day and worked hard and hired good people and, somehow survived it. And then you're on to the next thing.
Yep. So you figured it out and persevered yes. As you were thrown into the fire, so to speak.
And it's with the folks on the call today that are entrepreneurs. Really doesn't matter what business you start and what business and industry you're in. There's so much you have to figure out some of it is mundane stuff that you've never been involved with, and some of it is really complicated stuff that you've never been involved with, but you just have to figure it out. And then also figure out what do you not have to spend time on, what will you not do? And in these early stage companies, that's as much as anything is figuring out what are you going to do, and B, what are you not going to do and not use any precious resource on. The tech industry in the 90s was very much that, is just you figured it out as you went along.
Yep. Hold that thought, because I want to ask you later about, because you, in your role as a venture capitalist, you hire and interview a lot of people. So I'm going to ask you later how you assess someone's skills. So hold that thought. But we're talking about Microsoft, and that must have been just an amazing experience to have been at Microsoft when it was growing so rapidly. Could you just kind of give us a brief thumbnail sketch or overview of your time at Microsoft and kind of reflecting back upon it now? Just give us an overview.
Yeah, so I joined in '89 and actually got hired into Microsoft by our friend and former Deloitte colleague Rick Devenuti. And Microsoft uh, Deloitte had the Microsoft audit because Bill Gates' sister was in the tax department of Deloitte Seattle. So Microsoft became the auditor, or Deloitte became the auditor, and then, as typical in a lot of companies, Microsoft started hiring the best Deloitte people, and then Deloitte people hired people they knew. So Rick hired me in '89, and I think the title was Retail Accounting Manager. It was actually a really great job to join because I was responsible for the accounting and finance for all of manufacturing, all of product marketing, and then a few miscellaneous businesses like Microsoft Press, this publishing business Microsoft had. And so at that stage, all of the products were packaged products with discs and books. And so I learned all the SKUs, all the pricing, all the distribution model. And then because I supported product marketing, I got to know all the go-to-market folks and strategies. And Microsoft had done an amazing job hiring these incredible, talented product marketeers. Guys like Pete Higgins that went on to build Excel and Office, and Jeff Rakes who went on to build Word, Robbie Bach who was a gopher in the Excel group. So we all kind of grew up at the same time. And then within about a year, 18 months of joining Microsoft in the finance group, I got recruited to be what was called the business manager of the systems software division, working for this guy that ran it named Steve Ballmer. And so that was about the time Microsoft was just building Windows. And Steve ran the systems world, which was MS-DOS, Windows, this project we were doing with IBM called OS2, languages and hardware. And I worked for Steve in that role, just doing whatever he needed me to do. Everything from licensing deals to helping on reorgs to interfacing with HR and finance so that he didn't have to. And then Steve moved over to run sales, and I moved with him when he did that, and got to work on a few really interesting projects, most notably getting all of the countries around the world on a common measurement scheme, because they all had different, when he got them, Steve's a very data-driven analytic person, and he wanted a robust methodology for measuring every country and every business. So we built that. Then we incubated the Microsoft licensing program that became known as Select and is now their enterprise licensing program. And then I also worked on incubating the channel program that was called the Solution Provider Program. From there, I then got moved to Paris for what was supposed to be a 2-year deal, working for the president of Europe, Bernard Vernier. And there were two major things there. One was helping Bernard just run Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and all that entails from a sales and marketing perspective. And then the second thing is we were just beginning to figure out setting up our Irish operation. And so I worked on that project, and basically we moved all of the non-sales and marketing functions out of every subsidiary around the world and moved them to Ireland. And overnight, once that was done, we were paying the Irish a 12% tax rate versus a 45% tax rate average on all the continent countries in the continent. And I was supposed to be there 2 years, but ended up coming back short of that because the then CFO of Microsoft, a guy named Frank Gaudette, had got cancer. And so I got moved back to Redmond in the controller job. And largely the finance world was a mess at Microsoft. The company had grown way faster than the underlying processes and systems were getting built. And Ballmer at this point was running sales, and he was going berserk at finance because, you know, it was taking like months for the budget to get closed. There was no sales system. We couldn't pay our bills on time because we didn't have a procurement system and process. And so anyway, came back as controller, and that was largely to build the people and the systems to support Microsoft's growth. And that was the first job I had that was, I would describe as a large scale management role, because it was like 200 people at the time, and it was a lot of pressure to get systems and processes built. And so we assembled a really good team from IT, and then there was a guy that was the assistant controller named Scott Boggs. I don't know if you remember Scott.
Yep, I do.
But Scott he had a vision for what online analytics and information systems should be before they were ever built. And so we got SAP done around the world, and then he built with IT this incredible sales and analytics system that Ballmer loved. And so as a result of that, I got credit for it because it was my group. And so then from there, I moved into the CIO job. The prior two CIOs, chief information officers, had been fired. And the attitude of the execs and the product leaders was, oh, these IT guys must be idiots because everything costs so much and our systems have so many issues and downtime. And I thought the same thing. I wasn't too keen on taking that job, but got convinced by Steve and then the new chief operating officer, Bob Herbold, who became boss. Wonderful man. And I got into that IT job, and what I realized was, wow, this is just a really hard general management job that happens to be in technology. We didn't have strong enough leaders to stand up to the assault that the group was under from execs and product leaders. But mostly I really dug in, and what I realized was the cost and complexity and downtime issue wasn't really a function of IT guys were idiots. It was really a function of Microsoft's platform was very mature and very flaky, because we were trying to run the enterprise on Microsoft Windows NT, Microsoft SQL Server, Microsoft Exchange, and those products were all kind of version 1.0, and they just were not stable compared to the Unix platform. And so we got a bunch of work done to reinvent the way we work with the product groups, and we introduced something called eating our own dog food, which meant the product groups couldn't release certain products until IT had used it and signed off on it.
Okay.
So we sort of transformed that relationship, and then had some really talented guys that got a major worldwide network and data center redesign done in a very short amount of time. Then from there, I moved over to run the enterprise sales, the headquarter enterprise sales group, because in the last year plus of my IT work, I was spending most of my time with customers because the sales force was using Microsoft as the largest demonstrable example of enterprise computing on the Microsoft platform. And so it seemed natural to move into sales. I moved there. I was in that for about a year. Probably the biggest thing we did was a big joint venture with Accenture that is now called Avanade. And it's basically Accenture's go-to-market machine with Microsoft. I think now it's got about 30,000 people and about $5 billion in revenue. And so that was probably the biggest project I did. And then late in 99, Bill, we were under all the lawsuit problems and DOJ stuff and blah, blah, blah. And Bill was moving into the chairman role. Ballmer was going to become CEO, and there was going to be changes in who was in leading finance. So I got asked to move into that role in early 2000. And then that ended up being the finance function, IT, worldwide operations, real estate, et cetera. And that's what I did the last 5 years I was there.
Okay. Were the various roles that you had as you moved around, were they intentional as they groomed you for senior leadership? Or was it more, hey, we have a hole here. You seem like the right guy. Go lead this effort.
I think it was more the latter. The company at that time didn't really have any bench development program or any succession planning, at least that was visible. I think maybe at higher levels there might have been some succession planning, but it was growing so fast. And when I joined in '89, it was about 200 million in revenue. When I left in 2005, it was about somewhere around 50 billion or heading to 50 billion. And so it was much more a world of you got thrown into the fire of a job and see how you do. And if you didn't do it well, somebody else would get thrown into it or hired from outside.
Yep. Remind me, what year did Microsoft go public?
86, I think it was, Tom.
And do you recall what were the trailing 12-month revenues and what was the market cap on the day it went public?
I'm not sure, but it was a big stock market darling initially. I think the revenues might have been 150 million or something. But then in 88, I guess it was, there was a lawsuit from Apple that Microsoft was infringing on user interface, the graphical user interface of the Mac. And so when I joined Microsoft in '89, the stock was super depressed, relatively. And so the real acceleration started kind of in '90 with Windows, and then the Excel and Word products.
Yep. We have a question from Rick Rep about the culture at Microsoft, and Rick is a senior securities attorney here in Spokane, works with a number of startups and emerging companies on financing and M&A related matters. So Rick, what's your question?
All right, thanks, Tom, and thank you, Mr. Connors, for presenting to us. I'm curious, you mentioned a lot of fast growth. You talked about eat your own dog food and the work ethic of the farm boys that were in the executive ranks. I'm just curious, how intentional was the culture at the time you joined, and how was that culture managed through the growth? Because in the current environment, or in recent years, we hear a lot about Facebook's corporate culture, Google's corporate culture, Apple's corporate culture. I'm not sure that I've heard as much about Microsoft's corporate culture. And I'm just wondering, what did Microsoft do to get people to work together as opposed to sort of devolve into political turf wars? And given that experience that you've had, what advice would you give to a quick growing tech company in terms of how to do it different or how to do it better?
Yeah, it was first Bill Gates set a very incredible vision, which was a PC on every desk and in every home. And at the time, in the late '80s, early '90s, that seemed like almost laughable to a lot of people. But that vision for, hey, here's the goal, is to make that happen, was very aspirational, and a lot could fit under that, which was pretty amazing. A lot of things went into making that something from either a business perspective or a consumer perspective that almost anything could fit. I think secondly, at that time, the culture was very interactive human to human, because almost all sales were direct. It was face-to-face selling. There wasn't, you download this app and you never meet anybody from the company. It wasn't like that. And another thing that Bill and Steve did that was really brilliant was as the company grew across the world in every country, they hired local people as the general managers. So Americans weren't sent overseas as the expatriates to run Germany or France or the UK or Japan. Local people were hired in those markets, and they grew the markets. And then as the company got larger and it was really clear who the real talent was from these regions, those people would end up often in larger regional roles, or they would get hired and shipped to Redmond for key corporate or headquarter type jobs. So the vision was clear. The geographic reach was very local, and the ability to recruit and identify talent was amazing. It was very much a meritocracy, in that if you were good, you moved up, and if you weren't good, you just didn't last very long. Or if the amount of time it took at work was too much, some people checked out, because it was, for the 15 years I was there, I probably worked on average kind of, if you had, mail at home and all that, it was kind of 65 hours a week for 15 years. And so it was very demanding, but very rewarding. As we got into the point of expanding beyond the PC, into enterprise computing and then to consumer businesses, that got a lot more difficult to keep everybody on the same page. And a lot of what Steve was executing as the CEO was running a portfolio of businesses. There was the end user business that was Windows and Office for businesses. There was the enterprise business. There was MSN. There was phones. There was Xbox and gaming. And Steve was the person responsible for kind of first building the enterprise business, which is a remarkable franchise for Microsoft today, and then building a divisional infrastructure, so things like Xbox could grow and gaming could grow, enterprise could grow. Phones turned out to be a disaster. MSN turned out to be a disaster long term. But we moved from this focus on personal computer-oriented operating systems and end-user applications to a much broader set of businesses that really touched almost every part of computing and almost both business and consumer. And it was a very direct environment is probably the best way to describe it. And I think it was a culture that in today's world wouldn't work very well with young people that are growing up, with the notion of safe spaces and, you have to be happy every second of every day, otherwise life is terrible. It just wasn't like that. It was, you're on a mission and this is what we're going to do. And if you can't stay on board, then you should go somewhere else. I think, Steve, the one big challenge that happened, I think, after the company became wealthy and really successful, starting in about 2000, there was a real challenge with the haves and have-nots. That is, the employees that had made a bunch of money because they had started at the right time and the stock option program outperformed, and those that started at a different time when the stock wasn't performing and the options weren't paid out. So we did a big compensation redesign in 2002 and moved to more of a restricted stock program versus options. And then Steve also was brilliant in the way he designed it. Microsoft pays very well. Generally, you get paid well. And if you're in the top 2,000 there, it's pretty dang expensive for anybody but the most high successful startups or richest companies to recruit people away. So he redesigned the program. I think we went through, a number of years where kind of 2002 to 2005, where the focus became more inward than outward as we were figuring out how to grow, how to be a big company. And there were just too many rich people in senior roles that weren't as driven anymore. And so that slowed things down, as did the lawsuit stuff and the DOJ compliance that followed. One thing I really hand to Steve is he started investing in Microsoft Azure and the Office 365 stuff way before it was visible in revenue. They spent billions on it. And so it was really fortunate for when Satya took over, those products were pretty much ready. And Satya's just done an amazing job to change the culture to be driven, accountable, and also to be probably a culture that fits much better with what employees expect in today's world. But what it was in the 90s wouldn't work very well now.
Yep. Well, thanks, Rick, for your question. And that's a fascinating topic for which we could probably spend hours delving into. But I kind of want to transition to then your next career as a VC. And so I guess my question for you is, and you kind of highlighted how it was expensive in terms of opportunity cost to leave Microsoft if you held a senior position. And my guess is when you departed, you probably had a broad number of opportunities or things that you could have pursued, but yet you chose to jump into the venture capital industry. What attracted you to that?
Well, when the group of execs were leaving Microsoft in late 99, 2000 to start Ignition, they had talked to me about joining, and I was interested, but the request to take on that CFO job came up, and I really wasn't too keen about becoming CFO in late 99 because the market cap of Microsoft at the time was, I think it was like 600 billion on 20 billion of sales. And it was really clear where things were going in terms of our growth. We just weren't going to be growing at the same rate that analysts expected. And we had all this lawsuit stuff. And this Y2K thing had driven massive spending on personal computers and servers. And it was really clear that was going to go away when the Y2K hoax was finally figured out. It was like how it got built up to be this crazy end of the world event. It wasn't going to be at all, but companies got giant budgets to get ready for Y2K. Well, we knew that wasn't going to happen again. And so it was real clear that we were going to hit a slower growth. We're going to have a reset. And I wasn't too keen on the CFO job, but Steve Ballmer and Bob Herbold said, hey, look, we can't hire anybody from outside now. You have to do this. And I'm glad I did. But after 5 years, I was ready to do something different. And my wife and I have 4 kids, and the 2 older boys were late in high school by that point, and the 2 younger kids were a bit younger. And I just hadn't spent as much time at home as I wanted to and with my kids. And so I wanted more time with family, wanted more time with community. I didn't want to do another C-level job in a Fortune 100 company. And these guys were still interested in me joining the venture world. I really had I didn't know what it was, quite honestly. I mean, we talked to lots of VCs when we were at Microsoft because we bought a lot of companies and whatnot, but I didn't know how a small company board worked. I'd been around big boards. I just didn't know anything. And oh my gosh, it's been the most fun work I could ever possibly do. And it's exciting. There's lots of ups and downs, but mostly I just love working with early stage companies because it's unbelievable what early stage companies, regardless of industry, get done with limited resources.
Yep.
The agenda is so dang pure about, you got to get something done that's more than you had done before, because the goal is to raise more money at a higher valuation than the last time. And the alignment on that is easy to get done. Plus, it's so fun to celebrate when there's some success, because it's just so dang hard.
Mhm.
It's just so hard to build a company. And so it's just vastly exceeded my expectations.
Oh, that's great to hear. And your perspective and my perspective are a bit different, because I've always kind of been working with early stage companies.
Yeah.
And I always hear that, hey, big companies can't innovate, they're slow to move and all that. But I've never really had that perspective. So when you shifted into the venture industry, I can see where you were really kind of amazed how these young companies can get stuff done so quickly with a limited budget.
I tell people I would have been so much better CFO at Microsoft if I'd have worked in venture for 2 years before that and actually saw what people got done.
Yep.
It could, and I think, and it's really hard to take on large incumbents in any industry, but in tech it's especially hard because the big incumbents move pretty dang fast, and they've got unlimited time and unlimited money really to compete against you. So you've got to be really good in tech, in any industry, to build something, but in tech it's especially hard.
Yep. Well, based on your experience in the venture world, to entrepreneurs on the phone, what if you just had to boil down to kind of 3 characteristics of success or 3 predictors of success of a young business? What would they be?
I think the I would look at it in kind of 2 different angles. The first is, it just really helps if there's a market that's being disrupted. And because you can have the best product or service in the world, but if it's not a market that's growing or ready to be disruptive, it's just really hard. So market disruption opportunity is one. Number 2, I think, is a high quality product or service. And then number 3 is the team. And you can all, if you get something started that looks like it's going to be disruptive and it has a high quality product or service, you can recruit talent. But if there's talent without a market being disrupted or a product, it's really hard for even really good people to make something happen if the market's tough. And I think from a stepping back perspective on, hey, what are some things to really focus on? First, you've got to be a really great storyteller, because sales is so key in the early stages. And one of the things that just is remarkable about Silicon Valley is the storytelling capability. They're just unbelievable storytellers, and they dream big. And as one mentor in the venture world told me one time, he's a longtime venture guy in the Valley, very successful. He said, hey, some advice is 50% of what any company tells you, or 50% of what any venture capitalist tells you, is total bullshit and a story. You just have to figure out which 50%. And so storytelling to get sales, whether it's selling equity or selling a product or service, your story's got to be good and clear. That's so key. I think the second thing that really differentiates great entrepreneurs is they're super honest with themselves, their team, and their investors. And probably the problem that, if I look at a recurrent problem that I've run into in the venture world, it's with a CEO or entrepreneur co-founders who, because this is so dang hard to start a business, you have to be maniacally optimistic. If you're not an optimist, this is the wrong gig.
Mm-hmm.
So the founders and CEOs tend to be very optimistic, but often the problem you run into is they get way too optimistic about where the product market fit is, and you burn a bunch of money on sales and marketing before there's real product market fit, or there isn't truth coming back into the organization about the competition, about the product, about the market. And you end up with a bunch of time and money spent on sales and marketing before the product is ready, or the product is feedback loop is good. And then you get 2, 3, 4 years into it and investors are tired, the team is tired. So truthfulness of where you are and what the issues are is really key. And then I think the third real key thing is you guys just have to be relentless about recruiting talent. You have to be relentless about the story. You have to be relentless about getting money. You have to be relentless about your company winning. So, I really think the story, truth, and relentlessness are 3 characteristics that are really, really important.
Yep. Excellent feedback. Again, I could spend a lot of time on that, but we have a limited time with you. We do have a question from Naomi. Naomi, can you jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, John, for your presentation, and thank you, Tom, for giving me this opportunity. My question for John is, what are the challenges of venture capitalists in finding the next startup? So what are is it because they're receiving a lot of startup founders requirement, and then they are not how do they weed them out, and what are the challenges of them finding the next?
Really great question. And the conclusion I've come to is there's no way to predict or define who's going to be good at venture. There's no background that is the one and only background. And it's amazing how it takes some time to figure out, well, who's going to be good at picking winners? Because you have to look at a lot of companies. And I think there's a few things. I think first is you have to develop a network of good insight and market pulses. I think secondly, you have to have young people on your team that are just relentlessly building and working their network and talking to lots of entrepreneurs. And then you just have to find people that seem to be good at picking winners. And these 2 young folks that have worked with us for a while, and they've now started their thing, Fuse, that I'm helping out on. I think they'll be really good at venture because one of them's 33 and one of them's 28, and they are unbelievable networkers, but they also are just incredible at picking good projects. And some of it is assessing the entrepreneurs, some of it's assessing the market, some of it's getting feedback from other investors that but they're just really good at picking. And so it's much more an art than a science in picking winners. And then there's just a lot of things that can go wrong, even when you pick a winner, but the relentlessness is super key.
Excellent. We have another question from Chaz. Chaz, do you want to jump in?
Hey, yeah. So my question would be, what's your favorite way for John, or you and Tom as well? What's your favorite way one could show market disruption before actually implementing it and disrupting it, and putting out this product and proving it pretty much? What's another way, such as surveys or just other routes like that?
Really good question, Chaz. And one of my fellow partners, Nick Sturiali, who's in the Valley, and he's really good and he's done this for a long time. He's got a couple of terms he uses. That one is moments to joy. Like how quickly can the user of your product or service get to an experience where, man, it's like, okay, even the product's not done, the service isn't done, but there's something about it I like very quickly. I think the second thing is virality. If the product is showing that there's multiple people using or multiple people interested, you're really onto something. So figuring out what's the formula for your moments to joy, whether it's a physical product made of atoms or a software product that's intangible, how do you make it as easy as possible for them to know what you're doing, why it's valuable to them, and how they get something out of it? And then the second thing is, how do you get as many people as possible that are your target market either trying it for free or talking about it, even if they haven't yet purchased it? And there's some products that aren't going to have a free trial model, but how do you get people interested in talking about what your idea is so that you get maximize the number of people that are willing to try it, and you dramatically increase early the number of shots on goal you get to sell?
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Next question is from Robert. Robert, ask your question.
Yes. We have a startup and we've gotten small funding from a Mind to Market group here in Spokane. We're trying to get funding through SBIR grants, but I wonder when we should start looking for other venture capital or begin to talk to venture capital groups. Should we wait until we get more funding through federal grants, or should we start talking now?
Well, Robert, thank you. It's a great question. And the first thing is get the money wherever you can get it, because if you don't have money, you can't keep going. And, that's one of if you can get the SBIR grants, that's great. It's probably less predictable as to timing, but no investor is going to look negatively at a business that's been really aggressive getting alternative financing. And I think probably the biggest thing in terms of going to the venture route of funding is, how good a story do you have that this has an opportunity to be something that's a big idea? And so when the story resonates as a big idea, that helps a lot with getting financing. And then I think the second thing that investor will look at is, how willing is the founding team to be open to getting the talent necessary to realize that opportunity? And one of the first things that we try to suss out with young founders, especially if there's co-founders, is, hey, how willing are they to hire people to replace them if the need arises because they don't have the skill to carry it forward, or the opportunity just really begins to grow and they're not the right people? So how willing are you, first of all, can you tell a big story for a big idea? And then secondly, how willing are you to bring in the talent that is necessary to realize the opportunity? And both of those are really important characteristics to getting a venture-backed financing, because one of the things you should always be aware of also is every single conversation you're having with an investor, whether they're venture, whether they're a banker, it doesn't matter. Anybody that's going to potentially give you money, they're assessing you in every single conversation. Whether you think it's a fundraising conversation or not, doesn't matter. They're assessing you as to, is this a person I trust to back? Do they have a big idea? And is this a person trusted to back?
Okay, thank you very much.
Response.
You're welcome, Robert.
John, so it's 1 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of your time, but I did want to give, just to have you in the last question, which will be from me, is just tell us a little bit about Fuse Venture Partners and your role there, and how we can get companies in Eastern Washington exposed to Fuse.
Yeah, great question, Tom. So Fuse is about 2 years ago, I told the young guys in our group that, hey, I'm not going to do another fund. We were investing out of Fund 6, and I was a general partner and a key man, which means your investors are counting on you to be with that fund till it's done. And the way these funds work is they're going to last at least 10 years, probably longer. And a good example is Ignition invested out of Fund 2 was the first money in DocuSign. And it was 14 years before it went public. And so, and Splunk we invested in 2007, it went public in 2012. That was fast. So it's at least a 10-year thing. I'll be 62 my next birthday. And my wife and I have a whole bunch of things we want to be involved in. We're involved in and want to expand and do more. And so I told the young guys a couple of years ago, hey, I'm not going to do another fund when we're done with 6. So you guys should decide, do you want to do your own thing? And if you do, I'll help you. And I'll be involved, but not as a general partner. And I don't want any investor to think I'm a full-time long-term, because that would be dishonest, because I'm not going to be. Or you could go join other firms, and they're both talented enough that they would have gotten hired by any firm they wanted to go to work for. They wouldn't have been general partners, and they're young. And so they came back 4 hours later and said, well, we want to do our own thing. And so we've been working on that over the last kind of 18 months on the plan for that. And then myself and another gentleman named Satbir Kanuja, we agreed to be operating partners. And kind of the way I think about it is this venture thing has sort of 3 parts. One is you've got to be good at creating high quality deal flow. So you've got to be in the mix. You got to see a lot of things. You got to create high quality deal flow. They're really good at that. These 2 are really, really good at that. Secondly, they're incredibly good at identifying winners. They haven't had as much experience of winning those deals without or us older folks being involved, but they've been really good at finding high quality deal flow and really good at identifying the winners. And now they've got to be able to win those deals. And then the third thing, you have to be good at managing your portfolio once you invest. And they have almost no experience at that. They're just young. And so Satbir and I agreed to be operating partners, which means we're not GPs, and we're helping them on all 3 parts, but mostly on that third part and building their fund. And then for you Seattle Seahawks fans, I got to know a really terrific young man. He went to Utah State, reached out to an executive who'd graduated at Utah State a few years ago and said, hey, do you know anybody in the Seattle area I could meet that could be a mentor and advisor to me, because I'm gonna sign my big deal here, so I'm gonna be here at least 4 years. So anyway, I got introduced to this guy, Bobby Wagner, by an executive at Nike, Charlie Denson. And Bobby and I have become real close friends. And now he's on his second big deal. And anyway, brilliant, talented young man. And his goal is to, someday own his own NFL franchise. And I told him, well, you got to be kind of a billionaire to do that. And you're going to have lots of money, but maybe you'll be a billionaire, but you can't count on it. So you're probably going to have a consortium that you lead. So anyway, Bobby's been working with us and me over the last 5-6 years. And so he's a venture partner with Fuse. And so a big part of what we're looking to do is to be the preeminent enterprise software disruptor in the Northwest. And we're very open, Tom, and the whole team, to projects in Spokane or Eastern Washington. We have a project in Calgary. We have the first deal these guys did is in Vancouver, but we would like to find things that are proximate to the Seattle ecosystem so that we can help with talent and lots of interaction. But I think Spokane is incredibly well situated to really grow in importance as both a place where talent wants to live, and then secondly, a place where really good companies get started. I think the whole, the Boise, Spokane, Bozeman, Missoula, Colorado Springs, the number of people that want to get out of these East and West Coast cities is kind of shocking. And I think towards that, Spokane's an amazing community. And I think you just have to continue to do what you do in that community to make it an attractive place to live, and be super aggressive about what a great community it is. And my wife and I, every fall, we take a trip to somewhere in the United States we've never been. And last week, or never spent much time. And last week we were in Indiana, and it was fantastic as an egg guy. But we spent time in Columbus, Indiana, and that's the headquarters of Cummins. And it's amazing what that community has done with architecture, with community involvement. It's unbelievable. And I came away from that with so inspired for our own philanthropy, how to be more focused and deliberate. But I think Spokane has all the foundation to really grow and prosper as an important tech place, both as a place to live and for a place to grow a company. And as Tom and I were talking about, one of our former venture partners recently moved to Spokane, and he's very blunt. And he just said, "Hey, I just can't take Seattle anymore." It's a very, I live in Bellevue, which is way different than Seattle, but Seattle's a very broken place right now, politically and socially. It's very broken. San Fran's very broken. Portland's very broken. And people know that. They're just, the media is not covering it, but we all know what's going on. Yep. And that guy moved to Spokane. One of my son's close friends is with Salesforce Tableau. He just moved to Spokane, and a guy I know from DocuSign just moved to Spokane. So, great schools, a place where people treat each other really well, and a place where the community really supports free enterprise. And if you folks all come together with the real estate owners, with the mayor, with the county commission, I think you'd be blown away what an aggressive Spokane campaign could do. Yep.
John, thank you. I'm in violent agreement.
Yeah.
Those are just very, really appreciate those comments. And hopefully collectively as a community, we can seize the opportunity before us. Having said that, I'm really disappointed right now because we have a lot more questions. I have more questions, but we're already 10 minutes past our time. If you're gracious enough, we may ask you back to continue with some of the questions that I was unable to answer and others were unable to ask.
Well, and hopefully it's going to be in person. My assumption is, as I was in Indiana, one of the guys I got together with was a good friend, a guy that became a good friend. He was on the Nike board with me, and he's a Harvard chemistry PhD and became CEO and chairman of Eli Lilly. He said there's several things that there's so much misinformation about where we're at. But he said, secondly, there's so little knowledge about how far things have come in treating those that get really sick from COVID, regardless of their age. The treatment protocols have advanced so far. The US is so far ahead of any other country in terms of what happens when you get to the hospital. Many people don't know that.
Yep.
So we're in a way better place than people understand. His second point was everything will change after November 4th with this COVID thing. So hopefully the next invite, Tom, will meet in person.
Excellent. Well, I would love to make that happen, because this was supposed to be in person as well, but
Yes.
couldn't make it happen. But we will ask you back. Thank you very much, John.
Thank
And
you,
as
Tom.
I mentioned, you'll be getting a gift from us from Spiceology. We hope you enjoy it, and hope you even order more. And please say to hi to Kathy for me.
I sure will, Tom. Thanks so much. And thanks y'all for taking time. Really, very grateful I got asked to do this, and just best luck with all your stuff.
Many thanks, John.
Good
Yeah.
presentation, John. Thanks.